Welcome back to Sacred Arc, a podcast about life, loss, and the soul in between. I'm Kimberley, an intuitive grief guide, death doula, licensed esthetician, and whether I wanted to be or not, a lifelong student of grief. If you've made it to this episode, there's a good chance you've already crossed through something that's changed you. And maybe, quietly, unexpectedly, something else has started to appear alongside the grief. Not relief, not closure, but moments of lightness, a laugh that surprises you, a breath that comes a little easier, a moment where you feel present again and then immediately wonder if that's allowed. This episode is for anyone who has asked themselves, if I feel joy again, does that mean I'm leaving them behind? Because one of the most complicated parts of grief isn't the pain. It's what happens when the pain begins to soften, and no one really prepares us for that. We live in a culture that's very invested in the idea of moving on. Moving on implies progression, forward motion, distance from what was. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, encouraging even. But grief doesn't work that way, because love doesn't work that way. Love doesn't disappear just because someone dies, and grief isn't a malfunction. It's the continuation of a relationship in a world that's changed. So when we're told to move on, something else inside of us resists, not because we're stuck, but because we're loyal. Most of us were taught that grief looks like this: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, 5 steps in order with an implied finish line. And while that model was never meant to be a rigid roadmap, it's often used that way. People start asking questions like, which stage are you in? Have you reached acceptance yet? Shouldn't you be past anger by now? But grief doesn't move in stages, it moves in waves. You don't complete denial and never feel disbelief again. You don't finish anger and never feel rage resurface. You don't arrive at acceptance and stay there permanently. You can feel acceptance one morning and be flattened by grief that afternoon. You can feel relief and longing at the same time. You can feel gratitude and devastation in the same breath. That doesn't mean you're regressing, it means you're human. The stages don't fail you, the way we interpret them does. One of the hardest things about grief isn't just the loss itself, it's the pressure that follows. The pressure to be okay, the pressure to show improvement, the pressure to prove you're not stuck. We hear it everywhere, even when no one says it outright. It shows up in questions like, how are you doing now? You seem better. At least you're smiling again, or have you thought about moving forward? And what those questions often carry underneath is unspoken expectation. There should be progress by now. There should be distance. There should be closure. I felt that pressure myself, sometimes gently, sometimes sharply. There are moments when I realized people were watching me, not out of cruelty, but out of discomfort, looking for signs that I was healing correctly, that I wasn't staying too close to the pain, that I wasn't going to make them uneasy by remembering too much. I remember being told very directly that focusing on dates would hold me back and that I would never be happy unless I learned how to let go. And what that felt like wasn't support. It felt like a request to erase something sacred because it made someone else uncomfortable. But I've learned that remembering isn't what keeps me from happiness. Being asked to forget is. There's a difference between being trapped by the past and staying connected to what mattered. But our culture doesn't always know how to tell the difference. So remembering gets labeled as rumination. Honoring gets labeled as fixation. And continuing bonds gets labeled as refusal to move on. And slowly you learn to self-edit. You learn not to bring things up, not to mention certain names, not to talk about dates or moments or memories. Not because they aren't present, but because you don't want to make the room go quiet. That's one of the quiet losses of grief, not just who you lost, but the parts of your experience you stop sharing because they don't fit the timeline people expect. The myth of moving on tells us that healing means distance. But love doesn't heal through distance, love heals through integration. What people often call moving on is really moving away from discomfort, theirs and yours. And when you resist that, When you continue to remember to mark time, to carry love forward in visible ways, it can be misinterpreted as weakness. But it isn't. It's fidelity, it's honesty, it's refusing to pretend that deep love can be neatly resolved. I've learned that my grief didn't ask me to let go, it asked me to live truthfully. And living truthfully sometimes means holding joy and grief in the same breath, even when the world prefers simpler stories. There's something that doesn't get talked about very much, and that's what happens the first time joy shows up after loss. Not big joy, not celebration, just a moment where something feels lighter. You laugh, you feel connected, you notice yourself enjoying something without trying to, and for a split second it feels okay. And then, almost immediately, something else rushes in. Guilt, shame, confusion. You might think, how can I feel this when they can't? How can I be laughing when their life stopped? How can I enjoy this moment when they're not here to experience it? And that reaction can feel terrifying because it's not just guilt, it's fear. Fear that joy means forgetting. Fear that joy means leaving them behind. So a lot of people shut it down. They don't even consciously decide to. Their body just tightens. They pull back. They dampen the moment. They tell themselves, not yet. I shouldn't feel this. This isn't allowed. But here's what I want to say gently. That guilt doesn't come from doing something wrong. It comes from love. The shame isn't evidence that joy is inappropriate. It's evidence the bond still exists. When someone you love is gone, your nervous system hasn't caught up to the idea that joy and loyalty can coexist. Still believes that staying sad is how you stay connected, that suffering is proof of love, that feeling okay means abandonment. And no one really prepares us for that. No one tells you the first time joy shows up can hurt more than early grief, because early grief makes sense, but joy feels like a betrayal. You might even feel embarrassed by it, like you need to hide it. You might stop yourself mid-laugh or feel a wave of heaviness settle in your chest afterward. Or go home and cry without fully understanding why. It doesn't mean you're not ready for joy. It means your system is learning something new. Truth is, joy doesn't erase grief. It doesn't replace who was lost. It doesn't mean you love them any less. It means your love is still alive. And the first time joy shows up, it often shows up quietly as a test. Not from the world, but from inside you. Can I feel this without punishing myself? Can I let this moment exist without explaining it? Can I allow joy to pass through me without deciding what it means? There is no correct answer, but there is a permission that slowly develops. You learn that joy doesn't steal from grief. It doesn't compete. It doesn't cancel. It arrives carrying love with it, even when it feels complicated. And over time, you might notice something shift. The guilt doesn't disappear completely, but it softens, it loses its grip, it becomes something you can recognize without obeying. You begin to understand feeling joy doesn't mean they missed out, it means their love didn't end with them. And allowing joy doesn't mean you're leaving them behind, it means you're carrying them with you into moments they can't physically share but are still part of. And that is not betrayal, that's continuity. The other thing that no one really prepares us for is that grief doesn't just change pain, it changes joy. Joy after loss doesn't feel the way it used to. It's quieter, more fragile, less consuming. It doesn't sweep you up, it taps you on the shoulder. Before loss, joy might have felt expansive, easy, uncomplicated, something you could fall into without thinking. After loss, joy often arrives with awareness. You notice it while it's happening. You feel it in smaller doses. You're conscious of it in a way you weren't before. And sometimes that makes people think something is wrong. They say, I don't feel joy the way I used to. I don't get excited like I used to, or I feel numb even when something good happens. But that doesn't mean joy is gone. It means joy has been reshaped. Because grief adds depth to joy, and depth is heavier than lightness. Joy now carries context. It lives alongside memory. It knows what can be lost, so it doesn't rush in the same way. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It stays closer to the ground. Joy after grief is often bittersweet, not because something is wrong, but because your nervous system is holding more information now. It remembers love. It remembers absence. It remembers how quickly everything can change. So joy comes with tenderness, with care, with an awareness of fragility. You might notice that joy now brings tears or stillness or a lump in your throat, not because it's sad, but because it's layered. Grief also changes what feels joyful. Big, loud celebrations might feel overwhelming, and crowds might feel like too much. Noise might exhaust you, but quieter joys start to matter more. A calm moment, a connection, a sense of steadiness, a deep breath that actually lands. You don't chase joy the way you used to, you notice it. And sometimes that can feel like loss all over again because you grieve the version of joy that was effortless, the version that didn't come with weight. But there's another truth here too. Joy after grief is often more honest. It's less performative, less tied to expectation, less about how things look. It's rooted, grounded, present. You may find joy that now shows up as feeling safe for a moment, feeling connected without explaining, feeling steady instead of excited, or feeling meaning instead of happiness. And that doesn't mean your capacity for joy has shrunk. It means it's been refined. Because grief doesn't remove joy, it teaches joy how to sit with what matters. And joy after loss doesn't erase grief, it includes it. And when you stop judging joy for being different, you can start letting it belong without asking it to carry guilt. There's another layer here that deserves to be named. Sometimes joy doesn't feel good because it feels unsafe. If you've lost someone suddenly or after prolonged fear, your nervous system may associate happiness with vulnerability. If I relax, something bad might happen. If I enjoy this, I might lose it. So joy becomes something you approach cautiously. That doesn't mean you're pessimistic. It means your body learned something during loss, and learning how to feel safe again takes time. But there's a quieter truth about grief that doesn't get talked about enough. We don't move on from love, we carry it forward. That doesn't mean clinging to the past, it means allowing love to take a new shape. And sometimes that looks like letting someone influence how you live, letting their values guide decisions, or letting their presence live internally instead of externally. This is what's called a continuing bond, not in a clinical way, but in a human one. You don't stop being in relationship, the relationship changes. And when we frame grief this way, something important shifts. We stop measuring healing by distance and start recognizing it by integration. When we talk about carrying love forward, I want to be very clear about what that does not mean. It doesn't mean replacing who or what was lost. It doesn't mean finding a silver lining, and it doesn't mean turning grief into something palatable. Carrying love forward means allowing love to keep moving even when the form it takes has changed. One of the myths we're often handed after loss is that love has an expiration date. That if we're still loving, still remembering, still orienting our lives around what mattered, then we must be stuck. But love doesn't disappear just because someone dies. It looks for places to go. For a long time, I thought carrying love forward meant doing something big, something meaningful, something that would prove I was honoring what was lost. But what I've learned is that it often shows up in much quieter ways. It shows up in how you mark time, in how you choose what to celebrate and how, in what you say yes to, in what you let go of, and in what you refuse to rush. Sometimes carrying love forward means creating new traditions, not because the old ones weren't enough, but because the old ones no longer fit your nervous system. For some people, that looks like lighting a candle on certain days. For others, looks like volunteering, maybe donating, creating, teaching, tending to something. And for some, looks like starting something entirely new, a practice, a ritual, a space that holds love in motion. What matters is not what you do. What matters is that the action comes from connection, not pressure. New traditions don't erase the old ones. They don't compete with memory. They don't replace who was lost. They allow love to keep having somewhere to land. Sometimes carrying love forward looks like speaking someone's name, protecting your energy, choosing a quieter life, or choosing joy when it appears without interrogating it. There is no correct way to do this. There's only the question, where does my love want to go now? And the answer may change over time. That's not inconsistency, that's living. Carrying love forward is not about closure, it's about continuity. It's It's about letting love remain part of your life without asking it to justify itself. And if you're listening and you haven't found your way of carrying love forward yet, that's okay. You're not behind, you're not failing, you're still listening. Love knows how to move, it always has. You don't have to think of something big, a foundation, a cause, a visible legacy. Most love doesn't move forward in loud ways. It moves quietly, personally, in forms that don't need witnesses. Sometimes that's continuing something small, like cooking a meal they loved, listening to music that reminds you of them, visiting a place you shared, or speaking their name when it feels right. Because this carrying love forward means allowing memory instead of avoiding it, letting their photo stay on the shelf, letting their story be told, letting a moment exist without rushing past it. Sometimes love moves forward through service, not because it's expected, but because compassion is deepened. You notice pain more easily, you respond more gently, you hold space differently. You might show up for others in ways you never could before, because you now understand what it means to be unseen. Sometimes carrying love forward is invisible. It's how you speak to yourself now, how you rest, how you let joy arrive without apology, how you stop measuring your healing by timelines. Carrying love forward doesn't mean you always feel close. It doesn't mean you always feel strong. It doesn't mean you always know what you're doing. It means you allow love to remain active even as your life changes shape. And this part matters. You don't have to know how you'll carry love forward right now. Sometimes love moves ahead of you. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it rests. There is no single correct expression, no deadline. Carrying love forward is not about doing something meaningful enough. It's about letting meaning continue in forms that fit who you are now. Let's pause here, not to fix anything, just notice. Place one hand over your heart and the other over your stomach, and take one slow breath in through your nose and let it go through your mouth. Ask yourself gently, where do I still feel love in my body? You don't need to answer, just notice what comes up or what doesn't. Both are okay. Carrying love forward does not mean you're done grieving. It means your grief is evolving. It means love is finding new ways to live through you. That doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you human. You don't have to choose between remembering and living. You don't have to pick grief or joy. You're allowed to hold both. Nothing you loved deeply is ever lost. It just changes how it lives in you. Before we close, take one more breath. Notice what stayed with you. Notice what softened. And notice what you don't need to carry alone tonight. You don't need to take everything with you. Just take what resonates and leave the rest here. This has been Sacred Arc. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll meet you again in the space between.